What do you get when you cross the Pillsbury Doughboy with the three witches from Stardust? Well, aside from some really weird fan fiction and a very strongly worded cease and desist letter, you get Old Bonegrinder. Alright, so with Old Bonegrinder, I think the first thing that we have to talk about is names. Now, if you have watched my previous Death House video, you know that I'm not averse to changing the names of things, at least when it comes to talking to players. Old Bonegrinder is absolutely no exception. If you call this place Old Bonegrinder to your players, you might as well have them draw their swords, slap on some war paint, and go in charging. You don't want them to do that, okay? So when you are talking about Old Bonegrinder, or any of the NPCs are talking about it, it's the Old Mill, or just the Windmill, okay? That's a lot less murdery. Additionally, the character of Ophalia Wormwiggle, don't call her that. For the love of God. Call her Ophelia, or Sister, or literally anything else but Ophalia Wormwiggle. Okay, so that's names. We can call that done. Now, let's talk about the area outside the mill as we approach. We're going to work our way inward. Now, outside the mill, this is where I think regional effects can come into great effect. Now, if you're not familiar with regional effects, this is something that is actually typically only reserved for legendary creatures. Hags are not of that caliber. So, we can do something on a much smaller scale than the reality-bending stuff that is associated with legendary creatures. We're going to do something a bit more mundane and environmental. Now, within a 2-mile radius of the old mill, your players will find that most of the grass is dead or dying. There's no animal noises. In fact, there's not really any animals at all. And any animal companion that a party has with them that has an intelligence score lower than 5 has to make a DC 10 wisdom saving throw or be frightened and turned. Now, there are other signs of stuff that's going on in the area. Players with a passive perception score of 15 or higher are going to notice these little stick effigies. Go ahead and think the Blair Witch Project. These are small, maybe about yay big, and they're strung up on trees and inside low shrubs and whatnot, and they're kind of just ominous little figurines. So those are all strewn about the area as well. Now, moving inwards toward the mill, let's talk about the approach up the promontory. Now, in the module, there is a raven that sits on a perch and caws at the players, trying to warn them and pull them away and whatnot. Now, he's still there, but in our game, this is going to be Muriel, one of the were-ravens. In fact, the were-raven that players will actually encounter in the swamps of Berez. You see, I like to have Muriel be a recurring guide character for the players. Now, as written, Muriel is just an old, middle-aged woman who serves as a one-time information dump for the players. I want her to be more than that. So for me, in my game, she is a hot-headed, youthful were-raven who has these delusions of grandeur of overthrowing Strahd, and she's throwing her chips in with the party, much to the chagrin of the leaders of the Keeper of the Feathers. Now, it's way too early in the game for Muriel to reveal herself, but she's going to help the players in any way that she can. If the players end up getting in trouble inside the mill, have Muriel go ahead and send in a few swarms of ravens to break in through the windows, cause some havoc, give the players a distraction through which they can escape. Next up is the Megaliths. These are the tall standing stones that are near the mill. These are kind of an enigma, and that's intentional. They were put in by designer Jeremy Crawford, and they were given little more than just a physical description, so that DMs could adapt them to their own purposes. Now, in my game, I like to use them as kind of a safe haven, where players can go and get some protection and some respite from the evil that pervades the Barovian landscape. Now, I adapted this from one of the first Ravenloft books, actually the first Ravenloft book, where Strahd and another vampire were unable to attack a couple of boys who were camping inside of a ring of standing stones just outside the village of Barovia. Now, the location is shifted a little bit, but I think the concept remains the same. So that's how I'm using it in my game. All right, moving further inward, let's talk about the mill itself, the building proper. This is described in the book as just this leaning pile of decrepitude that no one in their right mind would actually go towards. Let's not describe it as such because remember, we don't want to put our players on guard, at least intentionally. So describe it as kind of leaning off to the side in a very sad way. It's just in disrepair. Its weather vanes are bare. It's one of the oldest buildings in Barovia, I would imagine. The fence in front of it is sagging under years and years of rain and wet mist, and the muddy trail leading up to it is got 2 deep furrows from a handcart. Granny's handcart, in fact, that the players have probably already encountered. All right, so that does it for the areas outside the mill. Let's go ahead and move inside the mill and see what's in there. When your players arrive and hopefully knock on the door, Bella's going to open the little peephole and she's going to look out at them. She's going to say, "Who are you? You here to buy some pastries?" Now, for some reason for me, Bella and her sister have really thick London accents. If the players indicate that they're here to buy pastries, then Bella's going to unbar the door and let them in. If they say no, she's going to close the peephole and dismiss them. If the players want to bust the door down, they'll need to make a DC 20 strength check and get prepared for a fight. But seeing as none of you are running a group of murder hobos, let's assume that they get in peacefully. On the first floor of the mill, they're going to find Bella all by her own lonesome, busying herself and tidying up and maybe pulling out a chair for one of the players. She's actually quite friendly to prospective customers, at least those that aren't already completely strung out on Dream Pastry. Upstairs is Bella's sister, Ophelia, remember, or just sister. Now, she's nowhere to be seen. She's gonna stay up there unless she's called down. Morgantha, by the way, is not at home. That's an important point. Morgantha is not at home. Okay? Now, Bella, at this point, is going to try to sell as many pastries to these players as possible. Okay? To that end, the whole first floor is kind of a shop area, and it's kept nice and neat. Remember, from my previous video, Morgantha and her daughters are running a business. In order to run this business successfully, they have to keep up some level of appearances. Nobody's going to buy pastries from night hags, or at least, hopefully not. But in any case, all the bones that are written into the module as littering the floor, they're actually tucked away neatly inside of a bag next to the oven. The barrel of demon ichor that fouls up the place with its smell, that's actually off to the side and it's covered. Any player who has a passive perception of 17 or higher is going to be able to smell the ichor. And if they make a nature check, DC 15 on the bones, they'll be able to determine that those are actually human. Now, assuming your players don't do either of those checks or have a high enough passive perception, everything should go pretty okay and pretty according to plan. It might be a friendly visit. If your players try to go upstairs, on the other hand, things might get a little dicey. You see, the upper floors of the mill are exactly as they are written in the module. It's not a nice place, and by the way, the kids are totally in the cages. So if any player makes a attempt to go up the stairs, Bella tries to thwart them, okay? She says, "Oi, you! I don't go into your house and start poking around your knickers. Get down here." Or something like that. In any case, Bella and her sister do not want players anywhere near the upstairs, so they will do everything in their power to peacefully keep them on the first floor. As you can probably tell, this is an encounter that I like to run just as purely role-playing, but there's a lot of ways that it can go south very quickly. And if it does, that could spell a TPK for actually probably most parties. Now, your parties are going to come upon the windmill probably around level 3, level 4 at the most, and 2 of these hags are a big challenge for a party of 4. And if you add a third hag, well, things get really, really dicey. In fact, it's almost a guaranteed TPK if you run the hags to their fullest potential. If combat does start, Morgantha's going to return home in about 10 to 15 rounds. This is basically exactly what Chris Perkins did on his Dice Camera Action podcast. When Morgantha does return, she's pulling her handcart. There's no pies left. She's sold them all. And in the back of the handcart is a sack. It's all tied up. It's actually got a kid named Lucian inside of it. Now, when Morgantha does return home, she's not immediately aware that her daughters are in danger. So this can give your players a couple of rounds to distract her, run away, or whatever else they choose to do. If Morgantha does join the combat, well, then the coven is complete, assuming her two other daughters are still alive. If things do go south, this is not the kind of TPK that ends the game. This is a great opportunity for you to fail forward. So the hags will actually capture the entire party, throw them in cages, and keep them for later. They're not going to outright kill them. They're much more useful alive and as tools. The hags are going to use them. Now, the hags have a quest for them, and that is to deliver the item called the Hags Eye to Castle Ravenloft and give it to Cyrus Bellevue without Strahd noticing. Now, in the module, Cyrus already has this item, but this is a great way for you to get your players to explore Castle Ravenloft while not ending the game when they get their asses kicked by the hags. If your players agree to do this quest, then the hags cast GS, or GS, or however you pronounce that spell, to compel them to do it. Now that spell lasts for 30 days, and if a player character does anything that is in opposition to the command, well, then they receive some necrotic damage. It can be removed with a remove curse or greater restoration or whatnot, but at this point in the game, your players probably don't have access to that. So it's either take a lot of necrotic damage or hoof it up to Ravenloft. Now, if your players are friendly towards Bella and Morgantha and all of that, and they buy some pies, then the hags are going to actually try to use them even further. They're going to spin a sad tale about how Bella and Ophelia were adopted by Morgantha from the orphanage over in Vallaki, and how it's such a terrible place, and that the headmistress is probably a hag that devours children in the night. They really want the party to get as many of those children liberated as possible, and bring them back to the mill where they can be properly cared for. Now let's talk about another modification where you remove the children from this chapter altogether. This is a modification from Reddit user Jade Raven. You might take the children out of this module for any number of reasons. Maybe you want to remove child abuse as a concept from the entire module. I'll talk about that in a future video. Now, right now, you can take the kids out of this chapter, and you can keep the darkness and depravity that is in here, and maybe even kick it up a notch. This is a fantastic modification. It's deliciously evil, and I love it. I wish I ran it myself. Instead of the kids, there's a baker named Valentin from the village of Barovia. He had two daughters named Ophelia, and Bella. Now, these two daughters were devoured in their infancy by Morgantha, and she birthed a couple of changelings to be raised by Valentin and his wife. After Bella and Ophelia became teenagers, they mysteriously disappeared. Valentin never did find them, and he eventually decided to leave the village of Barovia and move to Kresk. On the road, he was actually tricked into going into the old mill by Bella and Ophelia. He was lured in there with the idea that maybe that's where his daughters were. Well, obviously, they're not his daughters, they're hags, and they captured him with Morgantha's help. Ever since then, they've kept him prisoner, and they've been using his body parts to help make the Dream Pastries. They've been cutting pieces off of him and using a form of the regeneration spell to grow his limbs back. At this point, he is completely insane and filled with this delusion that his daughters are just misguided and can be saved if he just tries hard enough. He's been kept fed and fat all these years by a steady diet of Dream Pastries made from his own flesh. See? Pretty dark, even without the kids.